One of the most famous species has been something of a mystery until only a few years ago. It may look like a tree, but in reality, this is just a single giant leaf. It's called the Titanum, and it's a record breaker. But not because of what you see now. In a week or so, that green stem and the leaflets that grow on top will die and rot and disappear. But beneath the surface of the soil, there is a gigantic tuber, and it's from that that the record breaker will emerge. This extraordinary event occurs just once every 7 years. It will take 2 months to complete. But this new growth is neither a trunk nor a leaf. It's the bud of the biggest flower in the world. As it grows, day after day, a huge spire, the spadix, rises from the center of the developing flower. And then one evening, as darkness falls over the forest, the giant flower opens. This surely is one of the most astonishing of blooms. I first saw one of these amazing flowers growing in the wild in the tropical rainforest of Sumatra. But why are they so big? Well, the function of the flower, like all flowers, is to attract a pollinator. And this plant gives off the smell of rotting flesh. But it does something else, something you can see with a heat-sensitive camera. This remarkable device reveals something astonishing. The white areas at the base of the spire are significantly hotter than the surrounding plant. It's heating up. At its hottest, the spire can reach 37 degrees centigrade, the same temperature as the body of a mammal. And as it warms, something else happens inside the flower at the base of the spire. Hundreds of smaller structures begin to produce stringy pollen. The Titanum is readying itself for the arrival of pollinating insects. Tiny sweat bees and probably carrion beetles as well are attracted by a combination of the powerful smell and the heat.
Like fish guts. It hides its flowers under a thick leaf and only blooms for 0.01% of its life. It makes no evolutionary sense. It kind of seems to be the invention of a goth wizard, but in reality, it's the culmination of millions of years of evolution. Cover your nose and come on in. This is the corpse flower. Hey, I'm Tasha the Amazon, and you're watching Floralogic. Flowers are in the business of being attractive. The whole point is to get animals to come pollinate them. Titanarum, or the corpse flower, has evolved to attract pollinators that we would rather not have around. Most pollinators are attracted by sweet, energy-rich nectar, but some others are tricked into pollination. Bee orchids catfish bees into an awkward date. Drake orchids mimic female wasps to get male wasps to land on them and chill. But other plants use flies as pollinators. The lives of flies are nasty, brutish, and short. By the time they can fly, their only purpose is to reproduce before dying a few days later. Some species eat decomposing meat and lay their eggs in it so the larvae will have a ready source of nutrition when they hatch. These are the species the corpse plant targets. The plant's job is to mimic rotten meat as closely as possible so that flies will land on it and pollinate it. Corpse flowers are amazing at this. From the point of view of an insect brain, they're indistinguishable. They smell like dead flesh. They're warm to the touch, and they're bright red and moist on the inside. We wanted to see it and smell it up close. So we went to Gage Park in Hamilton, Ontario, where a giant corpse flower was in bloom. And there it was, blooming in a greenhouse in the middle of the Canadian winter, a mere 15,000 kilometers away from its homeland of Sumatra. They only bloom for up to 48 hours every few years, so seeing one was super lucky. Every time one blooms at a greenhouse, thousands of people come to see it. Thousands more watch the bloom online. People cannot get enough of these smelly freaks. This one is called Kramer. It's about 1.5 meters tall, though some other corpse flowers can be twice as tall. The jury's still out on if this one is a good neighbor. Despite being called a corpse flower, it's not really a flower, but an inflorescence, a structure that contains multiple flowers. It's also not a corpse, but sure smells like one. It was as stinky as advertised, a mixture of fish guts and boiled cabbage. Corpse flowers are really a structure of several flowers. The first European botanist who described it called it Amorphophallus titanum, which basically means Titanic amorphous phallus. They thought it looked like a man's body part. The nickname Titanarum is a new invention and was given to them because the other nicknames for it were too scandalous for early 20th century nerds. David Attenborough is incorrectly said to have invented the name Titanarum for his 1995 documentary, The Private Life of Plants. But the first reference to the name is actually in a 1961 edition of American Horticultural Magazine. It's not a hard name to get to, as arum is the common name for the plants in its family, and they happen to be the largest arum. The shaft itself doesn't have any flowers, but it's what attracts the flies. It's called a spadix, and it releases stinky chemicals that are irresistible to flesh flies and some beetles. It's also warm, which makes its perfume more volatile and helps sell the illusion of being real flesh. When you touch it, it doesn't feel that warm, and that's because it's the same temperature as your hands. It's only when you touch the leaves that you can tell the difference in temperature. The texture of the stalk is a bit like stale bread. At the base of the stalk, there are 2 rings of flowers. The upper ones are bright yellow male flowers. Insects have to squeeze in and out to get to the stinky bottom and get covered in pollen. Below the ring of pollen, there's a ring of bright red ovaries that take the pollen and make seeds. Once the insects reach the bottom, they look for crevices to lay their eggs. And in the struggle to find the most perfect, safest spot for their eggs, they unknowingly become pollinators. This is a crucial part of the process, and basically the whole point of the plant's evolutionary adaptations. But it's seldom seen because the flowers are covered by a leaf skirt called a spathe. Luckily, the greenhouse cut a hole in the leaf to collect pollen. There were no flesh flies, but we got to take a closer look at the ovaries. Cutest ovaries I've ever seen. The Titanarum blooms when it's ready to pollinate, but the female part of the plant only becomes receptive the following day. This is a neat trick to prevent self-pollination. It gives insects enough time to go around and find other plants to pollinate. After a day or two of bloom, the flower dies, and seeds are spread. If it germinates, the plant will start out as a corm, spending the first months of its life underground. Then, after several years, it will slowly grow into the majestic, stinky, cadaver-mimicking, insect-loving giant we all know and love. So what should we talk about next? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for new episodes every week. Thanks for watching. See ya.
This is an Amorphophallus Titanum that I grew from a tiny little bulb that I got from Gustavus Adolphus University in St. Peter, Minnesota, probably about 18 to 20 years ago. And I bloomed it before. This is the second time it's bloomed. It took me, I think, about 12 years before it bloomed. It's native to Sumatra, and it's probably the largest flower in the world. We grew it up into a large bulb, and when we planted it in this 42-inch pot, it weighed 200 pounds. It took three guys to get it in there and set it in place. So it grew a stalk up 18 feet tall with all kinds of leaves, and it grows and lasts like that for 9 months and dies down. And then usually in June or July, when it's really quite warm, is when they flower, and they literally grow between 3 and 6 inches a day. And so this flower is now just opened this evening. It's June 14th, and it smells really, really bad. And if I were to open the vents, all these flies would come in. Like tomorrow morning, the vents will open when the sun's out. The flies will come in and start trying to pollinate it down here where all the pollen is in this section. And it lasts for about 5 days, but the first day or two is the best. Right now it's kind of like at its peak. Tomorrow will still be good in the morning, and then it'll start sort of slowly collapsing. And it's about 6 feet 4 inches tall, which is pretty big. It's an amazing plant, and it takes a long time to grow, but it's well worth the wait. So this is really cool. I've never ever seen this on this flower before because it's now very late at night. But if you look at the top part of the flower, you'll see smoke coming out. So what happens in nature with this particular flower is that this part here actually produces heat that's warmer than the outside air. And it's putting out all this scent. So this is scent coming out. And what's just truly amazing is you can see it.
Hey guys, it's Jason with Orchids Limited, or orchidweb.com. I'm here today to talk about an anomaly happening here at Orchids Limited this year. In the summer of 2019, we've got 2 Amorphophallus Titanum, also known as the corpse flower, getting ready to bloom. Typically, when these plants are not flowering, they are dormant or in a vegetative state. So what they have in the base is a large corm, like a big potato, that stores energy. And after a dormant rest, they send up this large flower bud. The first signs of the flower bud on this particular plant were on May 1st, 2019, so it's been just over 2 months. There are 3 simple parts to this flower. We've got the bract, which is a protective covering, which will turn brown and kind of fall over as the flower unravels. We've got the spathe, which is the section that surrounds the spadix, which will fan and open out and has a really dark red center to it. This plant is called the corpse flower because it stinks. It smells like rotten meat. On average, there's a 4-hour peak of the flower in bloom with maximum fragrance, and then it starts to die back after that. The whole experience of watching it open to watching it closing is about 48 hours, so you've got a couple days to view it. They smell so bad because they're trying to attract flies quickly to pollinate the flower. We're going to be showing you how to pollinate this once it's open. You have a very small window of opportunity to pollinate the flower. So the first day it's open is the day you pollinate it. Typically people cut a square in the flower and then apply the pollen to the female receptors during that time. The pollen the plant produces comes out the second day when it stops accepting pollen. So these don't self-pollinate in the wild. You have to have pollen prepared ahead of time. I stored some from the last time it flowered, so we're going to be able to to pollinate it this year. And then we'll collect pollen from this one to use on this smaller, younger plant here. I believe actually these are the same age. Genetically, this one is just a bigger, better grower, has a larger container. That might have contributed to it growing faster and better. The Amorphophallus titanum is the world's largest inflorescence, or a cluster of flowers. There's a massive cluster of flowers around the base attached to the spadix, which you really can't see unless you're standing on a ladder looking down, or you cut a hole right here in the side to view it. The largest singular flower in the world is the Rafflesia arnoldii, but both flowers are extremely impressive when they're blooming, and if any botanical garden has announced something like this in bloom, typically you'll see hundreds, even thousands of people lining up just to observe them. This spadix here is going to get several feet taller before it opens. We've never had one with this wide of a spadix, so I think it's going to be a good show. I believe this is the third time this has flowered. I was told that we originally obtained these corms back in 1999. So next up, we'll come back when the flower is open, and we'll show you how the pollination process takes place.
Okay, so here it is. They're now getting close to opening. The smaller one has dropped a couple sheets. There's still one more to go over there. Some dropped them both. And then there's, it has grown now to 78 inches tall from the soil here. And that grew about 5 inches overnight, so that's pretty fast. And it still doesn't look like it's going to open for a while yet. We thought it would be tonight, but it's, as you can see around on this side, it's starting to turn purple here, and then the entire inside of this part of the flower has to turn purple before it opens. So it's really hard to guess exactly when these will bloom, but you know, because we only see them once every 3 years. So but I think it should be within the next day or two.
So here we are 9 days after we shot the first video with the Amorphophallus titanum. It's hotter than blazes in here today. It's probably in the high 80s, very humid, which is what these flowers love to crack open. And this morning, you could tell it was going to open because around the edge of the flower there were flies all over the place. And you can see right now there's flies flying around the top of the spadix. Right now, this flower seems to be opening at about 5+ inches an hour. So at 4:15 p.m., I believe this thing will be in full bloom probably anywhere between 8 and 10 p.m. Our sibling plant here is a little behind the other one, and I think it's probably got 2 to 3 more days before it opens up. Just kind of comparing the stages they've both gone through. It would have been nice to have them open at the same time, but the timing just didn't work out to have that happen. So now the titanum is in full bloom and the female flowers are ready to accept pollen. So what we're going to do is cut a section of the spathe out so we can access the female flowers, and then we're going to apply the pollen, which we stored from 3 years ago, with a paintbrush. So let's hope we don't make any bad cuts here. And typically people cut out a rectangular box to access the flowers. The male flowers will be active tomorrow, putting out the pollen, and then I'll come back and harvest that pollen to save it for a future date or to cross it with the other one we have that's about to flower as well. Okay, it's getting close. It's kind of like the consistency of a pumpkin, but much weaker. We'll cut a section out here so I can have access to it a little better. Okay, there we go. Now you can see the female receptors of the flower, and they're waiting to have the pollen brushed onto them. So I'm going to take a paintbrush here, and you can see the pollen is fine, just like yellow dust. And then I'm just going to spread it over these female receptors, and we'll do that a few times. And I'll probably just blow the rest of it in from the top to see if we can get any other random flowers to pollinate. Actually, what I'm going to do is use an extended stick. Oh, there's a beetle. Cool. So typically beetles and flies are what find these flowers to pollinate them in the wild. And that's funny, that one just crawled out that exit while we were working on this to see what we're doing. We're going to take this paintbrush now and I'm going to apply some more pollen to it. And I'm just going to go the extra mile here and try to get more fertilization from the other flowers, because I can access it like this and just brush it on. So most places that do it cut a hole in the wall of the flower, but technically if you wanted to preserve the flower and not damage it at all, you could do the entire flower this way. If the successful ones will set, they will form green fruits. Actually, the entire structure will form fruits, but only some of them will be fertile. But if you don't do the pollination, the entire structure will rot shortly after the blooming is over with. So this way it stimulates the entire flower to produce fruits, but only X amount of them will actually have fertile seed in them. And it takes an entire year for the seed to ripen. And when they're bright orange and red, it's when the hornbills in the wild are attracted to them. Then they will come eat them, extract them, and wherever they land, hopefully they will grow. And that's the entire process of pollinating an Amorphophallus titanum.
I didn't even realize they're so translucent.
Yeah, they're not really
There's all
that,
water in there.
they're not really that thick at all. So 4 days later, we had our second titanum flower. Actually, in the middle of the evening. Typically, they start to crack open by late morning, early afternoon, and we know it's going to flower that day. But this, we came in this morning, on Tuesday morning, and it was already slowly starting to close. But still strong in scent, which means it should still be receiving pollen. So we pollinated it. The spade on this one was a little more tight, so I couldn't access the female receptors from the top. So what I had to do is cut a square open on each side of the flower of the spade to access all of the female flowers. And so with this brush here, I applied pollen all around the female flowers. You can see above the female flowers the male pollen capsules, and probably by this evening to tomorrow morning, they extract little strings of pollen. And then I'll come in and harvest them and have them in storage for future hybridization with other Amorphophallus, because I'm interested in making hybrids with the titanum that potentially have not been made before. So that wraps up the flowering for this year, and we'll probably won't see these flower again until the year 2023. So we'll see you then.
It happens maybe only once a decade and lasts about 24 hours. The bloom of the rare and gigantic Titan arum, better known as the corpse flower. It's a mimic. It copies the stench of dead, rotting animals. But hold up, what you're looking at isn't actually the flower. That part, it's a modified leaf called the spathe. It even looks like raw meat. And this is the spadix. It heats up like a mammal's body. So warm, it steams. It's all meant to attract its pollinators, insects that lay their eggs on fresh carcasses. But the flowers, they're way down in here. Each of these is a male flower. And below are the female ones. With just hours to reproduce, the stakes are high for Titan arum. It would be easy if it could reproduce using its own pollen. But the plant needs fresh genetic material, pollen from other corpse flowers, to make these, the fruit and seeds that eventually will become healthy new plants. So, it staggers things. The female flowers are ready first. They get sticky. The plant sends out its powerful stench, more than 30 chemicals in all. Some are nice. The spathe releases a jasmine smell. But mostly, it smells like funky cheese, rotting garlic, or dead rat in the wall. That aroma tricks flies to come investigate, thinking it might be a good spot for their young. And they might bring along pollen from another corpse flower, brushing it on the female flowers. A few hours later, the male flowers release strings of pollen. Some of it falls on the female flowers, but by then they're no longer able to use it, which is how the plant avoids pollinating itself. Titanum is rare. Poachers and deforestation in Sumatra, where it's from, have taken a toll. And in botanical gardens, like here at the University of California in Berkeley, there aren't any other Titanums in bloom to share pollen with. So when one opens up, biologists often collect pollen by hand to freeze and use later, when another corpse flower is ready. Which is how this lonely giant survives, with such a foul and fleeting bloom. Hi, it's Lauren. We found this little guy cruising on a corpse flower in Berkeley. Slugs sometimes pollinate plants, but usually not corpse flowers. To see some prime time pollinators, check out our episode about how bees vibrate to collect pollen. And watch what happens when you put a hummingbird in a wind tunnel.
At least a quarter of 1,000,000 species of flowering plants have been discovered and named so far. And within this bewildering diversity, flowers come in all shapes, colours and sizes. But what are the very biggest flowers on Earth? This is the talipot palm, Corypha umbraculifera. This palm produces the largest flowerscape in the world, which can grow up to 8 meters long and have literally millions of tiny flowers along its length. While this is impressive, the flowers are very small, so I think we can do better in our search for the world's largest flowers. There are many ways to classify blooms. Some are single flowers that grow alone, while others consist of lots of small flowers that together make up a unified floral structure. In terms of single flowers, the biggest in the world belong to the parasitic plants called Rafflesia that grow in the rainforests of Asia. I'm in West Sumatra, Indonesia, on the search for giant Rafflesia blooms of the forest. These amazing flowers were discovered 200 years ago, but they flower so infrequently that they're still relatively little known. For the last week, I've been sending guides and porters in all directions through the jungle to try and look for developing flowers and to talk to villagers to see if there's any blooms open. And so far, every single one has come back negative. However, late last night, one contact came back and said there's a flower open in this forest. And it's not just any Rafflesia, it's the biggest of all, Rafflesia arnoldii, the largest member of the genus and arguably the biggest flower on Earth. And it's in bloom just over here. I have dreamt of seeing this giant flower in the wild for years. But Rafflesia blooms are rare and so not easy to find. Wow! Look at this! This is Rafflesia arnoldii, the biggest single flower on Earth. And let's measure it. It's about It's about 65, 70 centimetres across. They can get a little bigger. They're often known to be about 80 to 85 centimetres, and some reports suggest even over a metre in diameter. But still, it's an amazing flower, and it's meant to resemble a dead corpse. But it has a rather disgusting secret. Rafflesia flowers mimic the rotting bodies of dead animals. You can see it consists of 5 petals that are bright orange and warty. This is meant to resemble carrion, and inside it's got hairs like a dead corpse of some animal. And if I smell it, it's got a strong smell of rotting meat. It's quite incredible. This plant has an amazing life cycle. It's actually a parasite. It has no leaves. It exists as a network of fibrous tissues within a vine called the tetrastigma vine. And once in a while, buds develop. The buds develop over about 9 months to a year, and then suddenly burst open, forming this incredible bloom. But the bloom itself lasts for only about 6 to 7 days, then it dies and rots. In exactly the same forests of Sumatra, there grows another giant flower, which is even harder to see than Rafflesia. This plant is called Amorphophallus titanum, or the Titan arum lily. The enormous flowers of this species are bigger than those of Rafflesia. But it's not a single flower. Rather, it's made up of lots of little blooms. Like Rafflesia, the giant flowers of the Titan arum also only last a few days, then they wither and die. So they're very difficult to see in the wild. A friend in Sumatra let me know that this giant flower bud was about to open. So I jumped on a plane and flew out to Sumatra as quickly as I could. Just like Rafflesia, the Titan arum also uses smell as a mechanism to attract pollinators. That these giant flowers evolved side by side is testimony to the power of scent as an attractant. For in these dense rainforests, visual signals like petals are not very effective, whereas scent can travel vast distances, wafted on even the faintest jungle breezes. I can honestly say I have waited my whole life to see this giant flower in bloom in the wild, and I can hardly contain myself with excitement searching for it. And there it is, the Titan arum lily, and it absolutely stinks. I can already smell it from here. Let's go check it out. Wow! Just look at the size of this thing. This is bigger than I ever imagined. It took me a day or two to fly into Sumatra to reach this flower, and sadly, I think it was a little past its best. The petals had already started to age and curve inwards, but it was still very impressive. The biggest one of these ever recorded stood 3.73 meters tall. This specimen isn't quite that big, but let's find out how big it is. It's so big I can't even reach the top of it. As an approximation, about 3 meters tall. This flower has a really complicated pollination mechanism, and that partly explains the gigantic size of this structure. Inside, there are 2 bands of male and female flowers. The female flowers open and mature first and become receptive to pollen. Then they wither and die, and then and only then, the male flowers, the florets, release their pollen. Because the female ones have already withered and are no longer receptive, the flower can't pollinate itself. But this gigantic structure has the solution to that problem. This bit here in the middle is called the spadix, and it works just like a giant chimney. It releases scent, and if you smell it closely, it absolutely stinks, just like rotting meat or rotting fish, and it's actually known locally here in Indonesia as the corpse flower. This chimney heats up on its own. It actually releases heat and removes the scent into the air and helps spread it up just like a chimney. And that's extremely important because the nearest open flower like this might be kilometres away. So it's crucial for the flower to get its scent far and wide to attract pollinators. Whilst observing this giant flower, I could see this scent attraction mechanism working well. Lots and lots of flies were buzzing around the flower. They may have been attracted and flown from kilometres away from the nearest bloom to enable cross-pollination. The leaves of the Titan arum are produced on just as an impressive scale as the flowers. Each leaf can be the size of a small tree and often last for a year or more, slowly filtering energy from sunlight and storing it in the enormous underground tuber. A single Titan arum plant may wait several years before it has stored up enough energy to produce another gigantic bloom. Almost unbelievably, these diverse rainforests on the island of Sumatra are home to a third, much less well-known giant flower called Amorphophallus gigas. A friend called Brad Wilson was lucky enough to see one of these giant flowers in the wild. The blooms can be as tall as a lamppost, but are even rarer than Rafflesia and Titan arum. And they're even less predictable in terms of when they may flower. Sadly, I was not lucky enough to see an open bloom in the wild, but a friend on the island of Java kindly let me know when one was about to bloom in his garden. And this is it, Amorphophallus gigas. This is the tallest flower of the entire arum family. Down here from the base, all the way up, this gigantic scape. This flower stands at over 3 meters tall. But in the wild, plants with flowers over 5 meters have actually been recorded. Amorphophallus gigas works exactly like the Titan arum as a chimney. But here, the greater height allows the flower to distribute its scent even more efficiently. And just like the Titan arum, I saw plenty of flies attracted to the bloom. Believe it or not, both the Titan arum and Amorphophallus gigas can be grown at home, although you'll need a very large pot and a very large growing space with warm temperatures and high humidity. But both species can be brought to flower in captivity. Jensi Capitani recently flowered a Titan arum at his nursery Paradisia in Australia.
This is my Amorphophallus Titanum. We call him Tiny the Titan. He became famous in December 2016 when he produced a flower bud that grew to 1.8 metres tall and 1.1 metres wide. He became an internet sensation. Every TV station came to view him and thousands of people came through over a 3-day period.
Understandably though, the very biggest flowers in the world might not be suitable for everybody. The Titan arum has a smaller relative that's really fun and easy to grow at home. There's one just over here. This is Amorphophallus cognac, also known as devil's tongue, because of this large pointy spadix in the middle, said to resemble the tongue of a devil or a monster. This plant is actually really easy to grow at home. All it needs is a large pot to grow it in, and it needs well-drained substrate, and ideally a location where it's not exposed to direct sunlight. It likes a bit of shade. And really surprisingly, it can even be grown outside in the UK. It can survive light frosts and a bit of snow, providing that the corm is deep down enough in the ground not to freeze solid. It's very interesting because it doesn't even need a pot in order to flower. It flowers when the corm is like this. When it flowers, the flower will then die, then the corm will produce roots, and then it'll produce a single massive leaf for the season. It will take a few years for your plant to get large enough to flower, but it's well worth it.